A maid's daughter told Vampire King, "Sir, my mum has a mark, just like yours." What happened next? Do not look at him, Evangeline. Do not breathe too loudly. To catch the eye of a king is to invite death. The warning had been whispered into the freezing air, but as Evangeline knelt on the rough stone floor, watching the polished black boots stop inches from her trembling hands, silence swallowed the room. She could smell him, not perfume, but rain, iron, and deep, ancient pine. Against her better judgment, against every instinct of survival honed by years of cruelty, she lifted her gaze. "Sir," she breathed, her voice a fractured glass in the terrifying quiet. "My mother. She had a mark just like yours." The boots did not move. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the static of a gathering storm. The winter in the Northern Territories did not just chill the skin, it sought to freeze the marrow. It was a living thing, a hungry beast that clawed at the windows of Halden Manor, demanding entry. Evangeline Hartfield knew the cold intimately. It was her constant companion in the scullery, her bedmate in the drafty attic, and the only thing that numbed the ache in her scrub-raw hands. "Mr. Spot!" Beatrice Holden's voice cut through the kitchen clatter like a whip. Evangeline didn't flinch. She simply dipped her rag back into the bucket of grey, freezing water, and scrubbed the stone flagstone harder. The water was biting, turning her knuckles an angry shade of violet, but she focused on the rhythm. Scrub, rinse, survive. "Did you hear me, girl?" Beatrice stepped closer, the rustle of her heavy velvet skirts sounding like dry leaves. She was a beautiful woman in the way a frozen lake was beautiful, sharp, pale, and treacherous. Since Evangeline's mother had passed 10 years ago, leaving Evangeline as a ward of the state and an indentured servant to the Holdens, Beatrice had ensured every day was a lesson in humility. "I heard you, madame," Evangeline murmured, keeping her eyes on the wet stone. "It will be spotless." "It better be." Ophelia Winterbourne, Beatrice's daughter from a previous marriage, swept into the kitchen. She was a vision in crimson silk, her golden hair piled high in complex braids. She held a silver mirror, checking her reflection with obsessive scrutiny. Theodore Kingswell is not some petty lord coming to inspect the grain stores. He is the Alpha King, the wolf of the north. If he sees filth, he will burn this manor to the ground. "He does not burn manors for dust, Ophelia," Evangeline said softly, wringing out the cloth. Ophelia scoffed, kicking the bucket with the toe of her slipper. Freezing water sloshed over the rim, soaking Evangeline's thin apron. What would a scullery rat know of kings? He is a monster, Evangeline. They say he tears the throat out of anyone who lies to him, so keep your mouth shut and your head down. Evangeline said nothing. She merely dried the floor again. But her mind wandered to the stories her mother used to tell. "Not a monster," her mother had whispered, fever-bright eyes looking at something far away. "A guardian. The Kingswell line carries the weight of the mountain. Her mother, Sarah, had been a woman of secrets. She had died with nothing to her name but a locket she made Evangeline promise never to open, and a strange, crescent-shaped scar on her collarbone that she always kept covered. Evangeline missed her with a physical ache that rivaled the cold. "Everything must be perfect," Beatrice snapped, clapping her hands. "The king arrives at sundown. Evangeline, you are to serve the wine. Do not speak. Do not look him in the eye. You are a shadow. If you embarrass us, you will wish you had frozen in the woods." "Yes, madame." The rest of the day was a blur of frantic anxiety. The manor, usually gloomy and neglected, was transformed. Tapestries were beaten free of dust. Silver was polished until it gleamed like moonlight, and the scent of roasting venison began to fill the halls, masking the underlying smell of damp and mildew. As the sun began to dip behind the jagged peaks of the Iron Mountains, casting long, bruised shadows across the snow, the sound of horns echoed through the valley. They were deep, mournful sounds that vibrated in the chest. Evangeline, standing by the sideboard in the great dining hall, felt a strange shiver run down her spine, not of fear, but of recognition. It was a sound that called to something buried deep in her blood. The heavy oak doors of the manor groaned open. A gust of wind, carrying snowflakes the size of coins, swept into the hall, extinguishing the candles near the entrance. And then he entered. Theodore Kingswell. He was taller than the stories claimed, broad-shouldered in a way that made the grand doorway seem narrow. He wore no crown, only a heavy coat of black fur and leather that seemed to absorb the light. His hair was the color of midnight, swept back from a face that was severe, striking, and terrifyingly still. But it was his eyes that froze the room. They were amber, glowing with a faint, predatory luminescence in the dim light. The eyes of a wolf looking at a flock of sheep. Behind him walked Ambrose Hollowind, his advisor, a man of slender elegance and sharp features, carrying a ledger. But no one looked at Ambrose. The gravity of the Alpha King bent the room around him. Beatrice and Ophelia sank into deep curtsies, their heads bowed low. The servants lined against the wall trembled. Evangeline stood in the shadows, clutching the crystal wine decanter. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt small, she felt invisible. And yet, as Theodore Kingswell stripped off his gloves, tossing them onto a nearby table, his head snapped up. His nostrils flared slightly. Those golden eyes swept the room, bypassing the bowing nobles, bypassing the guards, and landing, with unerring precision, on the shadows where Evangeline stood. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Then he looked away, his expression bored, and the air rushed back into the room. The dinner was an exercise in suffocation. The long mahogany table was laden with delicacies the Holden estate could barely afford: glazed pheasant, root vegetables roasted in honey, and imported wines. Beatrice Holden sat at the foot of the table, a rigid smile plastered on her face, while Ophelia sat to the king's right, preening and laughing too loudly at things that were not jokes. Theodore Kingswell spoke little. He ate with mechanical efficiency, his movements controlled and lethal. He seemed less like a man dining and more like a predator waiting for an excuse to leave. "And the tithes from the western mills?" Ambrose Hollowind asked, his voice dry as parchment. He was checking the ledger, ignoring the food. "Delayed," Beatrice said quickly, her smile tightening. "The heavy snows, Your Majesty. The roads have been impassable." Theodore stopped cutting his meat. The knife clinked against the porcelain. "The snows did not stop my entourage," he said. His voice was a low rumble, a baritone that vibrated through the wood of the table. "Do not blame the weather for incompetence, Madame Holden." Beatrice paled. "Of course not, sire. It is a temporary setback." "See that it is," Theodore said, lifting his goblet. It was empty. Beatrice snapped her fingers at the shadows. "Wine!" Evangeline stepped forward. Her legs felt like lead, but her hands were steady. She had been trained to be invisible, a ghost in a grey uniform. She moved to the king's side, the heavy crystal decanter catching the candlelight. Up close, the Alpha King was overwhelming. The heat radiating from him was intense, a furnace burning beneath the black wool and linen. She could smell the scent of the winter forest clinging to him, crisp and wild. She poured the dark red wine, careful not to let a single drop splash onto the white tablecloth. "You have a lovely home," Ambrose said to Ophelia, though his tone suggested he found it lacking. "Oh, we try," Ophelia giggled, touching her necklace. "Though it gets so lonely here. I've often thought the capital would suit me better. The court, the fashion." "The court is a pit of vipers," Theodore murmured, watching the wine rise in his glass. "You would be eaten alive, girl." Ophelia flinched, her smile faltering. Evangeline finished pouring. As she pulled the decanter back, the cuff of the king's shirt shifted. He had unbuttoned the wrist for comfort, rolling the heavy fabric up slightly. The movement revealed the inside of his forearm. There, stark against the tanned skin, was a mark. It wasn't a tattoo, it was a birthmark, or perhaps a scar that had healed with supernatural precision. It was the shape of a jagged crescent moon intersected by a spear. A violent, beautiful sigil. Evangeline's breath hitched, a small, sharp sound that was loud in the silence. The decanter wobbled in her hand. A single drop of wine escaped the lip and landed on the king's pristine white cuff. It bloomed like a fresh wound. The entire room went deathly still. Beatrice gasped, horror contorting her face. Ophelia covered her mouth. The guards by the door stiffened, hands drifting to their swords. Evangeline froze. She stared at the drop of wine, then at the mark on his arm. The image of her mother flashed in her mind. Sarah, sitting by the fire in their draughty cottage, washing her neck. The way she would quickly pull her collar up if she saw Evangeline looking. But Evangeline had seen it, many times. That exact shape, that exact intersection of moon and spear. "It's the same," her mind whispered. "It's identical." Theodore did not yell. He did not strike her. He simply turned his head, slowly, to look at the maid trembling at his elbow. His eyes locked onto hers, amber colliding with her terrified grey. "Clumsy fool," Beatrice hissed, rising from her chair. "Get out of my sight. I will have you whipped for this." "Sit down," Theodore said. He didn't raise his voice, but the command slammed into Beatrice like a physical blow. She collapsed back into her chair, breathless. Theodore didn't look at Beatrice. He kept his gaze on Evangeline. He lifted his arm, inspecting the stain, then the mark revealed beneath it. Then he looked back at her face, studying her features, the high cheekbones, the pale eyes, the defiant set of her jaw despite her fear. Evangeline started, her voice barely audible. "Leave us," Theodore said to the room. "Sire?" Ambrose blinked, surprised. "Everyone out," Theodore commanded, his voice gaining an edge of growling authority that made the windows rattle in their frames. "Now." "But sire, she ruined your—" Ophelia began. "Out!" The roar was distinctly animalistic. It was the sound of an alpha clearing his territory. Beatrice grabbed Ophelia's hand and dragged her from the room. Ambrose hesitated, glanced between the king and the maid, and then bowed low, retreating and closing the heavy oak doors with a resounding boom. Evangeline was alone with the Wolf King. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. The fire in the great hearth crackled, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch toward them. Theodore Kingswell remained seated, turning his chair slowly to fully face her. He didn't look like a monster now. He looked curious and intense. "You are shaking," he observed. His voice was quieter now, lacking the performative cruelty he had shown the nobles. "I am afraid, Your Majesty," Evangeline confessed, clutching the decanter to her chest like a shield. "Good. Fear keeps you alive." He gestured to his wrist. "You were not looking at the wine. You were looking at this." He tapped the jagged crescent mark. "Why?" Evangeline swallowed dryly. The truth was a dangerous thing. In the Holden household, the truth usually resulted in a beating. But looking into those amber eyes, she felt a strange compulsion. It wasn't just fear. It was a pull, a gravity. He demanded honesty, not with threats, but with his very presence. She took a step closer, her legs trembling. "My mother," she whispered. Theodore tilted his head. "What of her?" She told me never to speak of it." "Your mother is not here. I am." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, invading her personal space even from a distance. "Tell me, girl. What did you see?" Evangeline took a breath, the air tasting of wood smoke and the king's scent, ozone and power. "Sir, my mother, she had a mark just like yours." The reaction was immediate. Theodore stood up. He moved so fast she didn't even see him rise. One moment he was seated, the next he was towering over her. The decanter slipped from her numb fingers. He caught it before it hit the floor. His reflexes were inhuman. He set the crystal vessel on the table with a soft clink, never breaking eye contact. He was close now, close enough for her to see the flecks of gold in his irises, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Be very careful," Theodore said, his voice a low rumble deep in his chest. "There are only 5 people in this kingdom who bear the sigil of the first pack. 3 are dead. 1 is me. And the last one." His eyes narrowed. "The last one has been missing for 20 years. "She had it," Evangeline insisted, her voice gaining strength despite her fear. "On her collarbone. She hid it. She said it was a curse." "A curse?" Theodore laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Perhaps she was right. He reached out. Evangeline flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, his hand, large and calloused, hovered near her neck. He didn't touch her, but the air between his skin and hers seemed to vibrate with electricity. What was her name? "Sarah," Evangeline said. "Just Sarah." "Sarah." Theodore tested the name. It clearly meant nothing to him. He looked disappointed, the intensity fading slightly. A common name for a common maid. "She wasn't common," Evangeline snapped. The defense of her mother bypassed her filter. "She was kind and brave, and she taught me that a king is only as strong as the people he protects." Theodore froze. His gaze sharpened again, piercing through her. That phrase. It echoed in the room. "Who taught you that?" he demanded softly. "My mother." Theodore turned away, pacing toward the fireplace. He ran a hand through his dark hair, agitating the strands. "That is the motto of the Iron Guard, the personal retinue of the late Queen." He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "If your mother bore the mark, and she knew the words." He stopped. The doors to the dining hall creaked open. Beatrice Halden stood there, flanked by 2 of the manor's burly guards. Her face was a mask of cold fury, though she feigned concern. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Forgive me. I worried this creature was bothering you. She is prone to delusions. Lying is a sickness with her." Evangeline shrank back. "I am not lying." "Silence!" Beatrice snapped. She looked at the king. "We shall remove her, sire. She will be punished for ruining your meal and your evening." She gestured to the guards. They stepped forward, reaching for Evangeline's arms. Evangeline braced herself for the rough grip, closing her eyes. "Stop." It wasn't a shout. It was a growl, low and vibrating with menace. The guards froze. Beatrice blinked. Theodore stepped between the guards and Evangeline. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He simply expanded his presence, the aura of the Alpha rolling off him in waves of suffocating power. The guards instinctively took a step back, their instincts screaming predator. "No one touches her," Theodore said. He looked at Beatrice with cold contempt. "You say she is a liar. I say she is the most interesting thing in this frozen wasteland of a house." Beatrice's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Sire?" Theodore turned back to Evangeline. He reached out, and this time he did touch her. He took her chin in his hand, tilting her face up to the light. His thumb brushed her cheek, rough but gentle. He was searching her face, looking for something, a resemblance, a ghost, a truth. "Pack your things," he told her. "What?" Evangeline gasped. "You are leaving," Theodore said, dropping his hand and turning to face the shocked room. "Ambrose!" The advisor appeared in the doorway instantly, as if he had been listening. "Sire." "Prepare the carriage. We leave within the hour." "But your Majesty!" Beatrice shrieked, forgetting herself. "You cannot simply take my servant. She is indentured. She owes a debt." Theodore walked toward Beatrice until he loomed over her. "How much?" "Excuse me?" "How much is her debt?" 50 gold crowns, Beatrice lied, inflating the number tenfold. Theodore reached into his coat, pulled out a heavy leather pouch, and tossed it. It hit the floor at Beatrice's feet with a heavy metallic thud. "There is 100, Theodore said coldly. "She is bought. She is mine." He turned back to Evangeline, his eyes burning with a promise of answers, and perhaps something dangerous. "Come, Evangeline," he said. "We have much to discuss about your mother." Evangeline looked at the stunned faces of her tormentors, then at the tall, dark figure of the king waiting for her. She didn't look back. She stepped out of the shadows and walked toward the wolf. The interior of the royal carriage was a world away from the freezing stone floors of Halden Manor. It was upholstered in deep, crushed velvet, the color of dried blood, and a small, magically contained hearth glowed with smokeless blue fire beneath the seat, keeping the air toasty warm. Evangeline sat on the edge of the bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She was acutely aware of the dirt under her fingernails and the smell of stale dishwater that clung to her thin, grey dress. Across from her, Theodore Kingswell sat with his eyes closed, his long legs stretched out, filling the small space. Ambrose rode up top with the driver, leaving them in an intimacy that felt dangerous. "You are staring again," Theodore said without opening his eyes. His voice was a low rumble over the sound of the carriage wheels crunching through deep snow. "I have never been in a carriage, Your Majesty," Evangeline admitted softly. "And I have never been warm in winter." Theodore opened his eyes. The amber glow seemed dimmer now, less predatory, more weary. He reached into a compartment beside him and pulled out a heavy fur blanket. He tossed it across the space between them. It landed on her lap, heavy, soft, and smelling of cedar. "Wrap yourself," he commanded. "You look like a stiff breeze would shatter you." Evangeline pulled the fur up to her chin, the warmth seeping into her bones instantly. "Thank you. Do not thank me. I am not doing this for charity." He sat up, leaning forward. "We need to talk about the locket." Evangeline's hand flew to her chest, pressing against the hidden metal beneath her dress. "How did you know?" "I am a wolf, Evangeline. I can hear the heartbeat of a rabbit from a mile away. I can hear the metal clinking against your collarbone every time you breathe." He held out a hand. "Show me." Evangeline hesitated. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Promise me, Evie. Never open it. Never show it to the wolves." But her mother was gone, and the wolf was sitting 3 feet away, having just paid a fortune for her freedom. Slowly, she pulled the silver chain from her bodice. The locket was old, tarnished silver, etched with vines that seemed to twist and move if you looked at them too long. Theodore didn't touch it. He merely leaned in, sniffing the air near it. His lip curled slightly. "Blood magic. Old blood magic." "It won't open," Evangeline whispered. I've tried for 10 years. There is no latch. It requires a key you do not possess yet, Theodore said enigmatically. He sat back, looking out the window at the passing forest, which was bathed in the silver light of the moon. Your mother, Sarah, did she ever speak of the Ashford line? No. She spoke only of survival. Smart woman. Theodore's expression darkened. The mark on your mother, and on me. It is the sigil of the first pack, the original shapeshifters who swore to protect the realm from the vampiric incursions centuries ago. It is not passed down by blood alone. It appears on those chosen by the moon goddess to lead. Evangeline's eyes widened. But my mother was a maid. Was she? Theodore looked at her, his gaze piercing. Or was she hiding? Suddenly, the carriage lurched violently. The horses screamed, a high, terrified sound that cut through the night. The carriage slammed into something hard, tilting precariously on 2 wheels before crashing back down. Evangeline was thrown forward, but Theodore's arm shot out, pinning her back against the seat with iron strength. Stay here, he ordered. The boredom was gone from his face, replaced by a terrifying, focused calm. What is it? Rogues, Theodore growled. His eyes flared, glowing bright gold in the darkness. Deserters who think a king traveling with a light guard is easy prey. He kicked the carriage door open and vanished into the snow. Evangeline scrambled to the window, wiping away the condensation. Outside, the world was a chaos of shadows and snow. A dozen men surrounded the carriage. They were ragged, dressed in furs and scavenged armor, their faces twisted with hunger and malice. Some held jagged swords, others had already shifted, their bodies contorted into hulking, wolf-like shapes that were far less noble than the king's presence. "Get the girl," one of the men shouted, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "The witch hunter pays double for the girl." Witch hunter? Evangeline's heart stopped. Theodore stood alone in the snow, his black coat billowing around him. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't shift. He simply stood there, an island of calm in the storm. "You are trespassing," Theodore said, his voice carrying over the wind without shouting. "Kneel, and I will make your deaths quick." The leader of the rogues laughed. "You are outnumbered, Your Majesty. We can smell the human on you." "You've gone soft." The leader lunged. What happened next was too fast for Evangeline to follow. Theodore moved like smoke. He ducked under the swinging sword, his hand lashing out to grip the man's throat. With a sickening crunch, the leader fell. Theodore didn't stop. He spun, his movements a brutal dance of efficiency. He didn't fight like a man. He fought like a force of nature. Every strike broke bone. Every dodge was calculated to the millimeter. But there were too many of them. 2 of the shifted wolves circled behind the carriage, sensing the prey inside. Evangeline saw the snout of a massive grey wolf press against the glass of her window. It snarled, saliva freezing on the pane, and then shattered the glass with a powerful blow. Evangeline screamed, scrambling back as the beast tried to force its way in. Glass shards rained down on the velvet. "Theodore!" she screamed, the name tearing from her throat. The king's head snapped toward the carriage. Seeing the danger, he roared, a sound that shook the trees, deep and resonant. And then he shifted. It was not the slow, painful transformation described in stories. It was an explosion of power. One moment he was a man, the next a massive black wolf, twice the size of the attackers, stood in the snow. His fur was midnight, his eyes burning coals. The black wolf launched himself at the carriage, tearing the rogue wolf away from the window with a single snap of his jaws. He tossed the carcass aside as if it were a rag doll. He stood before the broken window, hackles raised, teeth bared, shielding Evangeline from the chaos. He let out a low, vibrating growl that promised absolute destruction to anyone who came closer. The remaining rogues, seeing their leader dead and the Alpha King fully revealed, broke. They turned and fled into the dark woods, their tails tucked between their legs. The Black Wolf watched them go, chuffing a breath of steam into the cold air. Then he turned to the window. Evangeline was shaking, clutching the fur blanket. She stared into the massive wolf's eyes. She should have been terrified. A beast of that size could crush her skull with a bite. But looking into those amber depths, she felt safe. Safer than she had ever felt in the manor. It's him, she realized. He is the guardian. The wolf shimmered, the black fur receding, bones knitting back into human form. A moment later, Theodore stood there, breathing hard, his coat torn but his skin unblemished. He ripped the door open. "Are you hurt?" "No," Evangeline managed. "The glass." He reached in, brushing glass from her lap, checking her hands. His touch was frantic, searching for blood. "They knew," he muttered to himself. "They knew you were here. The witch hunters. Who are they?" "Fanatics," Theodore said, climbing back into the carriage and slamming the broken door shut, propping it with his shoulder. "They hunt anyone with the blood of the old lines. They think we are abominations." He looked at her, his face grim. "Your mother didn't just hide you from Beatrice Halden, Evangeline. She hid you from the world. Because if they find out who you really are, every hunter in the north will come for you." They arrived at the capital, Ethelgard, just as dawn broke over the mountains. Evangeline had expected a fortress of dark stone and iron, matching the king's demeanor. Instead, the Kingswell stronghold was a miracle of light. Known as the Glass Keep, it was built into the side of a sheer cliff face, comprised of soaring spires of translucent crystal and white stone that caught the morning sun and shattered it into a million rainbows. "It's beautiful," Evangeline breathed, pressing her hand against the unbroken window on the other side. "It is a cage," Theodore murmured, "but a gilded one." As the carriage rolled through the massive gates, a retinue was waiting. Soldiers in armor of burnished silver, the Iron Guard, lined the courtyard. Ambrose opened the door. "Welcome home, sire. I have already sent word to the infirmary to prepare a draft for the girl's nerves." Theodore stepped out, then turned to offer his hand to Evangeline. As she stepped down, the courtyard went silent. Every eye was on her. A human girl, dressed in a maid's rags, wrapped in the king's own fur, descending from the royal carriage. A man stepped forward from the line of guards. He was older, with salt and pepper hair and a face scarred by claw marks. He wore the insignia of the commander of the guard. "Sire," the man bowed stiffly, "we did not expect guests." "Commander Ashford," Theodore nodded. "This is Evangeline. She is under my personal protection. She is to be given the Starling Suite." The commander, Nathaniel Ashford, stiffened. "The Starling Suite. Sire, that room has been sealed since—" "I know," Theodore cut him off. "Open it." Nathaniel's gaze shifted to Evangeline. His eyes were cold, calculating blue. He scanned her face, and for a second, Evangeline saw a flicker of recognition. Shock, followed by immediate suspicion. "As you command," Nathaniel said, his voice tight. "Ambrose, take her," Theodore said. "I must convene the War Council. The attack on the road was not random." He turned to Evangeline. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something else. His hand twitched at his side. "Rest. You are safe here." He turned and strode up the grand stairs, his black coat billowing. Evangeline was led through halls that seemed carved from ice. The floors were heated, radiating warmth through her worn shoes. Ambrose led her to a set of double doors carved with birds in flight. Inside, the room was breathtaking. A massive bed with silk sheets, a balcony overlooking the snowy valley, and a wardrobe filled with clothes. "Why?" Evangeline asked, turning to Ambrose. "Why the Starling suite? Who did it belong to?" Ambrose stood by the door, his ledger clutched to his chest. He looked at her with a strange mixture of pity and wonder. "It belonged to the king's betrothed," Ambrose said softly. 20 years ago, before she vanished the night before their wedding." Evangeline felt the blood drain from her face. "What was her name?" Ambrose hesitated. "Her name was Sarah." The world tilted. Evangeline gripped the bedpost to keep from falling. Sarah. Her mother? Her mother had been betrothed to the Wolf King. No, the timing was wrong. Theodore was young, perhaps late 20s. "Not this king," Ambrose corrected, seeing her confusion. "Theodore's older brother, King Alaric. He died of a broken heart, or so they say, a year after she disappeared. Theodore inherited the crown and the burden." Ambrose walked to the wardrobe and pulled out a dress of deep blue velvet. "You have her eyes, Evangeline," Ambrose said quietly, "and if you have her locket, then you are not just a maid." "Who am I?" she whispered. "You are the daughter of the runaway queen," Ambrose said, "and the niece of the current king's greatest enemy. If the council finds out, they will not see a girl. They will see a political weapon." He placed the dress on the bed. "Wash. Dress. Hide the locket. Tonight is the blood moon feast. Theodore will try to protect you, but in the glass keep, the walls have ears, and the wine is often poisoned." Ambrose bowed and left, the heavy door clicking shut. Evangeline stood in the center of the room that should have been her mother's. She walked to the mirror. The grime of the journey was on her face, but beneath it, she saw it. The resemblance to the woman who had scrubbed floors and died in silence to keep a secret. She reached for the locket. It felt warm against her skin, humming with a low vibration. Click. For the first time in 10 years, the locket sprang open. Evangeline gasped. Inside was not a portrait, but a tiny folded piece of paper and a ring with a black stone. She unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. It was her mother's handwriting. "My dearest Evie, if you are reading this, the wolf has found you. Do not trust the Ashfords. Do not trust the council. Trust only the one who bears the mark. Theodore was a boy when I left, but he had a good heart. If he has become the king I hoped, he will save you. If not, use the ring." Evangeline picked up the ring. It was heavy, the black stone swirling with smoke. A knock came at the door. Heavy, authoritative. "Open up," came Nathaniel Ashford's voice. "We need to ask you some questions, girl." Evangeline squeezed the ring in her fist. The game of survival hadn't ended at the manor. It had just begun. The heavy knocking on the door didn't just rattle the wood. It seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards of the Starling suite. Evangeline stood by the hearth, the flames casting long, dancing shadows against the walls that felt less like shelter and more like a cage. She shoved the obsidian band onto her thumb. It was loose, sliding around the knuckle, cold and heavy as a sin, and hid her hand in the folds of the deep blue velvet dress Ambrose had given her. "Come in," she said, forcing her voice to be steadier than the trembling in her knees. The door swung open, and Nathaniel Ashford entered. He did not bow. He did not pause to admire the room's splendor. He walked with the stiff, aggressive gait of a man who believes the world owes him its submission. He closed the door behind him, the lock clicking with a sharp, metallic sound, like a pistol hammer cocking in a quiet room. "So," Nathaniel said, his ice-blue eyes raking over her with a mixture of disdain and reluctant recognition. You cleaned up well. You look just like her. It is unsettling. You knew my mother, Evangeline stated, standing her ground by the fireplace, letting the heat warm her back. She would not shiver in front of him. Knew her? Nathaniel let out a sharp, bitter laugh that held no humor. He paced toward the balcony, glancing out at the snowy expanse before turning his predatory gaze back to her. I grew up with her. Sarah Ashford, my younger sister. The jewel of our family, the pride of the Hunters. She was perfect, until she ran off with a monster. He took a step closer, his hand resting casually, yet threateningly, on the hilt of his sword. She was supposed to marry Alaric. She was supposed to unite the Hunters and the wolves, to bring them to heel, to civilize the beasts. Instead, she fell in love. Disgusting. Love is not disgusting, Evangeline said quietly, her chin lifting. It is when it destroys a dynasty, Nathaniel spat, his composure cracking to reveal the fanatic beneath. She fled the night before the bonding ceremony. Alaric went mad with grief. A wolf without a mate is a dangerous thing. He died a broken husk, and our family was disgraced. We were laughed out of court. I have spent 20 years rebuilding the Ashford name, purging the weakness, proving our loyalty. And now you show up. He lunged, moving with a speed that belied his age, grabbing her wrist in a vice-like grip. Where is it? The locket. I know she gave it to you. It contains the codes to the old armory. Things a maid has no business holding. Evangeline cried out, twisting her arm, trying to break his hold. The movement caused the fabric of her dress to shift, and the black ring on her thumb flashed in the firelight. A void of darkness amidst the orange glow. Nathaniel froze. He stared at the ring, his face draining of color, his eyes widening in genuine horror. The obsidian band. She stole it. That belongs to the High Hunter. It controls the wards. It belongs to me, Evangeline hissed, a sudden surge of adrenaline overpowering her fear. Before Nathaniel could react, the balcony doors blew open with a deafening crash of shattered glass and howling wind. Snow swirled into the room instantly, carrying with it a figure of terrifying power. Theodore stood there, the storm raging behind him. His coat was gone, his shirt torn, and his eyes were no longer amber. They were glowing molten gold, the beast surfacing, demanding blood. "Get your hands off her," Theodore roared. The sound wasn't human. It was a tectonic rumble, a vibration that shook the crystal vases on the mantel until they cracked. Nathaniel released her instantly, stumbling back as if burned. He smoothed his tunic, his mask of civility slipping back into place with practiced ease, though sweat beaded on his brow. "Sire, I was merely questioning the guest, ensuring she was not a security risk." "You were threatening my guest," Theodore snarled, stepping into the room. The temperature plummeted, his breath fogging in the air. "Get out, Nathaniel, before I forget that your family has served the crown for centuries, and remember only that you smell of treachery and rot." Nathaniel glared at Evangeline one last time, a silent promise of violence, a vow that this wasn't over, before bowing stiffly and retreating. Theodore turned to her, the golden light in his eyes fading slowly to a warm, worried amber. He reached for her bruised wrist, his touch impossibly gentle for a man who had just torn a door off its hinges. "I should have killed him," he whispered, his thumb tracing the red marks on her skin. "I should have ripped his throat out." "No," Evangeline said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Not yet. He wants something. He called himself a hunter. He talked about bringing wolves to heel." Theodore's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. Tonight is the blood moon feast. The entire council will be there. Nathaniel will try to make a move. He has been planning this for a long time. He looked into her eyes, searching for fear, but finding only resolve. Stay by my side, Evangeline. Do not leave my shadow. Tonight, the Glass Keep becomes a battlefield. The great hall of the Glass Keep was a cathedral of ice and light, but tonight it was transformed. The massive skylight above was dominated by the blood moon, a swollen, crimson orb that bathed the white stone walls in a sinister, rusty glow. Hundreds of nobles, shifters, and dignitaries filled the room. The air was thick, suffocatingly hot, smelling of roasted boar, spiced wine, and the underlying metallic scent of adrenaline and wolf musk. The tension was palpable, a tightly wound string ready to snap. Evangeline walked beside Theodore. She wore the midnight blue velvet, the locket visible against her pale skin, the ring hidden on her finger. She felt 1,000 eyes on her, judging, hungry, curious. She kept her head high, mimicking the regal posture she had seen in portraits, though inside she was the terrified girl from the scullery. "Chin up," Theodore murmured, offering her his arm, his muscles tense as stone beneath the fabric. "Let them see you are not afraid. Wolves respect only strength. If you bleed fear, they will bite." They reached the dais. Theodore sat on the obsidian throne, a massive chair carved from volcanic glass. He gestured for Evangeline to sit in the smaller, ornate chair beside him, the chair reserved for a queen. A collective gasp rippled through the hall, louder than the wind outside. Wine goblets paused halfway to mouths. Whispers hissed like snakes. "My lords and ladies," Theodore's voice boomed, silencing the room instantly. "Tonight we honor the moon, and tonight I present a guest of the highest standing, Evangeline, of the line of Sarah." Nathaniel Ashford stood up from a table near the front. He wasn't drinking. He was waiting. He raised a goblet, his smile sharp as a blade, glinting in the red light. "A guest?" Nathaniel shouted, his voice carrying to the rafters. "Or a mongrel? A half-breed daughter of a traitor and a runaway? Do you mock us, King Theodore?" The room erupted in murmurs, the sound of a gathering storm. "She bears the blood of the enemy." Nathaniel pointed a shaking finger at her. "She is not one of us. She is a spy for the humans. She wears the face of the woman who broke the North." "She bears the mark." Theodore stood up, his voice thundering, his aura flaring so bright it pushed back the red shadows. "The sigil of the first pack, the mark of the Guardian." "Lies!" Nathaniel kicked his chair back, the wood clattering on the stone. "You have been bewitched, King Theodore, just like your brother. This witch has clouded your mind, but we will not let the kingdom fall to weakness again." Nathaniel drew his sword. It wasn't steel, it was silver, etched with runes. At that signal, half the guards in the room turned. They didn't draw their weapons on the crowd. They drew them on the king. "Treason!" Ambrose gasped from behind the throne, clutching his ledger like a shield. "Purge the rot!" Nathaniel screamed. "Kill the wolf! Save the man! For the purity of the North!" Chaos erupted. The loyalists clashed with the traitors in a deafening roar of steel and snarls. Tables were overturned, wine splashing like blood. Theodore shoved Evangeline behind the throne. "Stay down!" he commanded, his eyes wild. "Don't move!" Then he leaped from the dais, shifting in midair. The transformation was violent and beautiful. Bones cracking, fur erupting. The massive black wolf landed among the traitors, a whirlwind of claws and fury. He was a blur of darkness, tossing armored men aside like rag dolls. But there were too many of them. They had come prepared. "Now," Nathaniel commanded. Traitors on the balcony dropped heavy nets of woven silver chain. They fell over the black wolf, searing his fur on contact. Theodore roared in pain, a sound of pure agony that tore at Evangeline's heart. He thrashed, snapping his jaws, but the more he fought, the tighter the silver burned, incapacitating his strength. Nathaniel approached the trapped king, raising a heavy silver spear, its tip gleaming with lethal intent. "For the good of the North," Nathaniel sneered, preparing to strike the killing blow into the wolf's exposed flank. "No." Evangeline didn't think. She didn't calculate. She didn't hide. She scrambled over the obsidian throne, her dress tearing, and ran to the edge of the dais. She raised her hand, the one bearing the black ring, pointing it directly at Nathaniel. "Stop!" she screamed. She felt a surge of heat from the ring, not burning, but waking. It traveled up her arm, straight to the locket at her throat, and then slammed into her heart. The locket burst open with a blinding flash of white light. The light didn't just illuminate the room, it possessed it. It pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat, ancient, heavy, and undeniable. It was the weight of the mountain, the depth of the forest, the silence of the snow. The silver net on Theodore turned to dust, disintegrating into harmless grey flakes. The silver weapons in the hands of the traitors grew red-hot instantly, forcing them to drop their swords with screams of pain as the metal seared their palms. Nathaniel stumbled back, shielding his eyes, the spear clattering to the floor. What sorcery is this?" Evangeline stood on the dais, glowing with an ethereal mist, her hair floating as if underwater. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a conduit for the first pack. "It is not sorcery, uncle," she said, her voice amplified by the power of the stone, echoing with the authority of 1,000 ancestors. "It is the authority you craved but never earned. The North does not bow to butchers." The hall fell into a terrified, reverent silence. The blinding light faded slowly, leaving Evangeline standing tall, the ring smoking faintly on her finger, the locket open and empty. Theodore, back in human form, naked from the waist up and bleeding from angry red silver burns across his chest and arms, stood slowly. He didn't look at his attackers. He looked at Evangeline. He looked at her not with fear or gratitude, but with awe, as if he were seeing the moon for the first time. Nathaniel was on his knees, nursing his burned hand, his face a mask of shock and ruin. He looked up at the girl he had threatened, his eyes wild. You are an abomination." "No," Theodore said, his voice raspy but firm. He limped to Evangeline's side. He took her hand, the one with the ring, and raised it for all to see. "She is the balance, the bridge between the hunter and the wolf, the prophecy my brother died believing in." He looked at the crowd, his gaze challenging every soul in the room. The Ashfords sought to divide us, to rule through fear, to keep us at war with our own nature. But the first pack was founded on unity. Evangeline has the blood of both. She carries the legacy of Sarah and the protection of the Kingswell line. He looked down at Nathaniel, his expression hardening into stone. "You wanted to hunt monsters, Nathaniel? Look in the mirror." "Arrest him," Evangeline said softly. It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. The loyal guards, recovering from the shock, seized Nathaniel and his conspirators. As they dragged the screaming commander away, kicking and spitting, he locked eyes with Evangeline one last time. "You will never belong," he spat, his voice cracking. "You are nothing but a scrub maid. You are dirt." "I am a survivor," Evangeline replied, her voice steady, carrying clearly through the silent hall. "And I am done scrubbing your floors." As the heavy oak doors boomed shut on the traitors, the adrenaline left her. Evangeline's knees buckled, the world tilting sideways. Theodore caught her before she hit the ground. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her hair, disregarding the blood and the ash. He was shaking, tremors of rage and relief running through his massive frame. "You saved me," he murmured into her neck, his breath hot against her skin. "I thought I lost you. I thought I lost everything." "You saved me first," she whispered back, holding on to him, her fingers digging into his shoulders. "In the kitchen? In the snow?" The court watched in silence. Then, slowly, the Iron Guard lowered their spears. The nobles bowed their heads. One by one they knelt. Not out of fear, not because of a threat, but out of reverence. They knelt for the Wolf King who had bled for them, and for the girl who had tamed the storm. Years later, the bards would sing that winter ended the day Evangeline Hartfield took her place at the Glass Keep. It didn't, of course. The snow still fell deep and white, and the winds still howled through the passes. But the cold was different. It was no longer a cruelty to be endured. It was a clarity to be cherished. Evangeline never took the title of queen. She remained the lady of the keep, the keeper of the balance. She and Theodore ruled not with fear, but with a fierce, protective devotion that healed the scars of the North. The mark on her shoulder and the mark on his arm remained, a twin reminder that destiny isn't about bloodlines or ancient scrolls, but about the courage to rewrite the rules when they are broken. Nathaniel Ashford spent his remaining days in the deep iron mines, stripped of his name and titles, working the very earth he thought he was too good to walk upon. Karma, it seemed, had a poetic sense of irony. The man who sought to rise above all ended his days beneath everyone. On quiet nights, when the political maneuvering was done and the castle slept, Evangeline would sit by the roaring fire in the Starling suite. Theodore would rest his head in her lap, the mighty Alpha at peace, his breathing steady and deep. She would touch the locket, now silent and closed, and smile. She had been a girl afraid to breathe, afraid to take up space. Now, she was the woman who held the breath of a kingdom in her hands. Love, she realized as she ran her fingers through the Wolf King's hair, was not about finding someone who made you safe from the world. It was about finding the one person who made you strong enough to face the dark, and knowing that when the sun rose, you would be standing together, defiant, unbroken, and free. If you enjoyed this story of love, destiny, and the power of truth, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales from the Glass Keep.